All right, so we're live. We'll give it about 10 seconds. They're going to start to hear us, but I'm just going to. All right. Hey, welcome, Eric. Let me know, Mr. Monroe, if you can see us and hear us okay. And then I'll give it a minute or so and let people are coming in here. So, and I know we're about 10 seconds delayed, but it'd be great, Eric, if you can let me know. Yeah, I heard, Keith, that you guys got rain, but then I heard there's mudslides now as a result. At least that's, thanks, Eric. At least that's what they're saying anyway. So.
Plus, I got the toxic air. So from all that rain, it's kicking up all the toxic stuff. So
yeah,
and water and everything else.
Eric, is it flowing? I know you're, probably a few hours away, Eric, but are you getting any of it your way?
The toxicity in the ash, no, it's kind of going the other way. But we did get our first rain here in about 11 and a half months. So wow. That's all good news.
11 and a half months?
Yeah, first measurable rain.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's kick things off. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday to you all for the last, hard to believe, Monday of January. That's crazy, right, Phyllis? We're already going to tick off 1 month in 2026.
It's crazy.
Unreal. Absolutely unreal. I was reading this article on this vishing attack, and I'll look down for a minute, but basically here's the scenario, and I've been reading about these more and more, and I wanted to bring Chris Lair on because he's going to do something at Write a Boom that's really impactful, and he's going to talk about it. So even if you don't come to Write a Boom, you can kind of get a subset of what he's doing and how you can use it in your MSP, this tabletop. But basically, I'm going to sum it up here, and then I'll read a little bit specifically what's going on. But threat actors are targeting organizations by sending them large amounts of spam email. They will then set up Microsoft Teams infrastructure. They will pose as the help desk. They'll obviously, understand who they're targeting, whether they get that through, stolen credentials and, through access brokers and some set of like that, or, through LinkedIn, very a la the MGM attack, right? That happened, a little over a year ago. And lo and behold, if you're somebody that's getting all the spam and someone's coming over Teams, although external, but for the lay person would think, wow, it's the help desk coming to save me. And the executives have told us, about the spam issue, and they want us to help you right away. Please download this remote control tool so I can help you. So that's the kind of the setting the stage. Specifically, I'll just kind of read this one in particular, and I'll put the URL in there from me, but it's, I'll quote Sophos that's been tracking this. They dubbed this threat actor as a Stack 5143 and Stack 555777. The company said both threat actors are operating their own Microsoft 365 service tenants as part of their attacks, and took advantage of default Microsoft Teams configs that permit users on external domains to initiate chats or meetings with internal users. By the way, this is one of John Strand and Black Hill's go-to for their pen testing right now. And it's like hot knife through butter. So, what I wanted to kind of do is twofold. One, let me introduce Chris, who you all know, I should say majority of you know, who we were going to talk to a little bit about this, but he's doing something at Write a Boom that is very similar in nature. And then before we get going, my good friend Todd Swartzman of 20 some odd years reached out to me as he got this email, an MSP out of Dothan, Alabama, and says, hey, we just dealt with this with one of our clients, which was my concern, by the way, why I wanted to address this, because this is something I believe MSPs and their clients are going to be dealing with on a fairly regular basis in 2026. I'm sorry, 2025, dating myself here. So Chris, with that, let me start with you. Quick intro. I'll roll to Todd, and then we'll get things
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. Chris Lair with Solace, based out of Austin, Texas. We're incident response and managed security provider. In MSSP, yeah. Too many acronyms today. But yeah, so been involved in doing this stuff for a long time. And yeah, just like Andrew said, when it comes to Ride a Boom, we're going to be doing a session again this year, pre-day session that's around incident response, specifically around a Black Basta situation. Excuse me. So what we're going to see there is we're going to incorporate things that really have happened in a Black Basta attack and provide it in a tabletop type scenario over 2 hours, really with the MSP as the focus. So if you've attended, my incident response sessions in the past, it's going to be really similar. We don't sugarcoat anything. We bring real life examples from what we see, what MSPs do well, what they don't do well, and call them out for it and all those types of things. So that's what we're going to do. And the cool thing this year is, so it's going to be with Noam Morgenstern, who's been on here, who has the Exigence platform. But we're also going to have Clark Harshbarger with us from CrowdStrike. So he's a director of IR for CrowdStrike. So he's going to be able to bring in a lot of content as well and experience and stuff to the floor as well. So I'm stoked just to be able to do this, but with him involved, it's going to be even more special.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know Chris, just one last anecdote is that you had an MSP for many years, and then when you guys got purchased by CFC, the insurance company that really wanted your IR and defer, really that subset of the company, you sold off that piece. But so you have the perspective of both sides is my point.
No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we've been around 22 years, and roughly 17 of those we had an MSP side of our business, and we always kept those separate. But I was in both sides of the business, and so when it came time for us to be acquired, there was really no motivation to have the IT side. So we divested that. Now that's rolled up into what is the Integris. But yeah, I'm deeply love MSPs, deeply involved in it. I am involved in a number of different advisory councils and advisory boards regarding MSPs. So yeah, that's why I'm here to educate and again, not to sugarcoat anything, because I don't want to see MSPs making the same mistakes that other MSPs do.
Yeah. All right. So switching gears, Todd, thanks for coming on. I'll just set the stage. MSP, Todd, 30, 40, 50? I forget how many people you guys are in Dothan now.
About 65 right now.
65. Congrats on all the growth, man. When we started,
that's half of Dothan. He's hired half of them.
When we met Todd, what was there, like 10, if that?
Were there that many? I don't know.
I don't even know.
It was
back
in
awesome,
04 or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome growth. So Todd, you see this email. I'm like, hey, this is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, timely. We dealt with this just recently. So can you give everybody out there, hey, here's an MSP, 65 employees, dealing with the exact same things you all do every single day. So walk us through this, Todd.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, one of our longtime customers, they've been a customer since before I met you, actually. And they user-reported email bombing, just mass spam, hundreds of messages a minute going to his mailbox. And turns out this was happening to a few other people, all executives at this company, which has been in the press a lot for good things. They're just growth. They're in a good industry, around 4,000 or 5,000 employees. But he let us know and this happened about 6 weeks ago. So called our help desk, said, hey, getting a lot of spam. Got one of our 365 experts in there looking at it, looking to spam filters, ingesting it to address the email bombing. And around 10 minutes later, we get an alert from Huntress that this person downloaded AnyDesk and once the install happened, it started downloading some malicious scripts and trying to run them against his machine, which Huntress shut down and isolated the host. Well, in the middle of all this, we get a call, or what is it? We get an email from the end user saying, "Hey, thanks for helping me with my email issue." And my guy's like, "Wait, we weren't talking to you yet. That communication happened like 5 minutes later." And so the bad guys made a Teams call to this end user, said, "Hey, I'm going to technical support, going to help you look into this." Got them to download AnyDesk. Did their thing. In the middle of this, the end user got suspicious and realized it was coming from this other domain that he never heard of before. And he looked it up, and it's some structural reinforcement company out of Indonesia, I think. So their tenant got compromised. Or they're impersonating him. Who knows at this point? But so yeah, in the middle of all this, our help desk, another help desk guy says, "Hey, something weird's going on." He called in and said that he got a call from somebody via Teams, and long story short, everything kind of came together at that point. And we figured out what was going on, and the bad guys never got really a chance to do anything. They tried to enumerate the domain, but it was a work group laptop because this guy travels all the time. So all it did was enumerate like 2 accounts and the work group name. And everything else was shut off by Huntress at that point. So yeah. So we looked a little deeper, and it's like, well, that's weird, because this tech support iteration or engagement is nothing like our normal tech support engagements. The person that experienced this, he's been at that customer forever. He's dealt with us dozens of times, but just caught him in that moment. Oh no, something bad's happening, and my savior on a white horse is gonna protect me, and let him in. So yeah, that's the high points.
Wow. So Todd, hindsight, right? Always being 2020. Now that you guys have been through this, one thing that when I think about is security training, right? Important, we need it, etc. But I wouldn't say necessarily always keeping up real time. Fair in like, hey, this is the threat du jour. What's going on right now? Now that you've lived this, any thoughts on how you might approach security awareness training? And again, I'd love for you to either sit in here or remote on YouTube to listen to how Chris is going to do this via tabletop. But yeah, I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, this customer's had security awareness training for quite a while, but this particular person hadn't done a course in 11 months.
Interesting.
We at first thought this was like a BEC type thing, but this had nothing. This was strictly social engineering coming from outside the organization. So nothing was ever compromised other than inviting somebody in. In the nature of their business, they have to engage with people all over the place, via Teams and whatnot. So it's not unusual that some third party could, call them. They're having meetings multiple times a day. Mm-hmm. So with third parties, running Teams or Zoom or whichever platform.
Interesting. And the other thing, Phyllis, let me ask you this. One thing Todd said that was really telling. Hey, this is a decent. So this is probably, this is all on the MSP side, right? 3,000-4,000 employees, larger, whether it's co-managed or not important right now, Todd, but larger side of the M of SMB that we deal with.
Yeah.
And doing well in the news. So Phyllis, it's clear the threat actors are paying attention. Now, is that, automation paying attention these days to, hey, in the morning, dump every story of this type in my feed and with a chat bot and let me see who's making news. But it's certainly showing relevance of, hey, I'm going to target these executives. What are your thoughts on on this in general from your perspective? If you put your Intel hat days back on.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is definitely. It's just so funny that you were talking about this as well, just because I had been looking at this as well, just from other people talking to me about it, because it is becoming more prevalent and people are being targeted, right? And we see this a lot more. And it's just interesting that, you know, we think that video chat gives us some sort of sense of, you know, kind of security. I see you, you see me. And you just see people are being targeted in organizations. And, you know, if you're talking about nation states, this happens often, right? So you want to target someone who is worth the time, someone who is going to have access to high value data, and someone who publicly, if something happens, then perhaps it's more impactful. So I think perhaps criminals on the smaller scale will also be doing the same thing, right? It just makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's going to have the most data? Who's going to be the most forward facing? Who's going to be the person who's talking to other people? Who's going to be the face of the organization? So it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Interesting. It's great. Great. Well, thanks for that perspective, Todd. Like I said, awesome. Thank you for, like I said, really important that you were here, that this isn't just theoretical. This is, you know, and again, it's interesting. And maybe, like I said, just those of you out there are listening that have larger customers that are, you know, in the news, you know, I would use that as a kind of a key to say, hey, this is something we should probably tabletop. Are your key executives in the know on how to handle this kind of stuff, etc. So
Yeah,
again,
one improvement that this triggered is we're going to redo our onboarding documentation. You know,
Oh,
we
yeah?
use Huntress so we can do those custom videos and everything. So we're going to add to the how you engage with us to just do the extra step.
Interesting.
And like say, hey, this is how we'll normally engage with you. So if it's outside this channel, be suspicious. Hang up the phone and just call us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Eric, I fibbed. I'm going to give one more question to you, and then I'll hand it to Phyllis. You were dealing with something tangentially phishing related. So when you hear this, you hear executives, and you know, you think the legal side, you know, the MSA, you know, what we do, what we don't do. Anything get triggered in you as, you know, MSPs are dealing with these, you know, executives, higher value? Hey, did you do the executive security awareness training? Did you not do it?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, you and I talked, you know, last week about an issue that I was dealing with that kind of brings out the human side of the phishing attack. And you know, the short story is that I have a client, and Chris knows this as well, that the threat from the employer, that my client fell victim to a phishing attack. He's was a C-level executive. Fell victim to a phishing attack. The bad guys got in. They stole a bunch of money from the company. And now the company wants to have this former executive be personally liable to some extent for the damages associated with the phishing attack. And by personally liable, I mean, they essentially want to take away stock options, right? Or the right to exercise certain stock options, which I think is a really, really slippery slope. But you know, stock options are subject to equity agreements. Equity agreements are written very much in favor of the company, to give the company broad discretion. And one of the issues that was that if there was any quote unquote financial, I forget the exact term, financial impropriety.
Like impropriety.
Yeah, was the clause that said, look, we can claw back your stock options if there's any financial impropriety. Well, is falling victim to a phishing attack and then having the threat actors steal the money, is that financial impropriety? I don't know. I hope we're going to settle this before it ever gets to trial, but it kind of puts a human face to this, because people, right, can get in a lot of trouble for this thing. And it's, like I said, I think it's a really, really, really steep, slippery slope. I hope that it doesn't go anywhere beyond this, but it's certainly scary.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Eric. Really. So Phyllis, I'm going to turn it to you to ask Chris some questions. Chris, you have quite a few options, so I'd like you to be careful because Phyllis is going to claw those back momentarily.
Is wrong though.
Just one commentary on, that situation that Eric is talking about, just because, people, we always say, oh, don't be afraid to report. Don't be afraid to do these things. But people perhaps don't report when something bad happens because they don't want to they don't want to get in trouble. They're worried they're going to be held liable. For damages, and so
and it should be noticed. It should be noted, by the way, Phyllis, that in that situation, the company provided absolutely zero security awareness training to my client.
Or big thing you started, rightly so, is, hey, can you show me the logs? Can you show me what the forensics?
And they were insured, and they didn't make a claim, and they didn't bring in forensics, and it's just a mess.
It's a mess.
That is a mess. Anyway, so Chris,
yes,
what gave you the foresight and the impetus to have this black Basta, if I'm saying that correctly, breach simulation at right of boom?
And maybe Chris, can you for those out there listening, going, what is a black Basta? Can you set the stage real quick on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Black Basta is one of the ransomware as a services organizations out there, if you want to call them that. So you can go research and see a lot of these ransomware as a service organizations tie back to others. So there's a whole kind of like family tree of these guys out there. But for a while there, and they're still around, but for a while there, they were one of the most prevalent groups out there doing attacks. And so especially what we see in the small to medium sized space, we saw them a lot. And so what kind of inspired this, when we were having conversations with Andrew and Noam about how we wanted to do it this year, is we did want to, purely focus it on a situation and a scenario and not go through multiple scenarios or whatever. And this one seemed to be fitting because the fact that they're imitating or a support organization. And for MSPs, that means they may not necessarily be directly imitating you, but if it's a support, your client's going to assume it's them. And so it just makes sense that it's going to hit closer to home in this type of scenario. I mean, for years we saw these threat actor organizations, ransomware as a service, focus on MSPs to attack MSPs, but we're not seeing that as much anymore, but we are seeing where they're trying to take advantage of the relationships, that is, or whatever the case may be. And, I can also say that, we see where these ransomware groups might not try to attack an MSP to get to their clients, but they will find a client with a particular issue, find out they have an MSP, and then through some other methods start to find out that whatever that issue with that one client is commonplace for the rest of the MSP's clients. So we'll start to see them launch attacks against the other MSP's clients, not necessarily going through the MSP, but seeing stuff like that. So sometimes shared credentials, the same configurations on firewalls or VPNs and those types of things. So yeah, really this content is to be as relevant as we can to something that's currently happening, as well as something that kind of hits the MSPs, in the kidneys to where they feel it and take some lessons away.
Phyllis, can I ask Chris a quick question there? Just
tell them no.
Yeah, I was about to say no, Andrew. I have the floor. No,
you had the floor. Absolutely. Hey, so Chris, a lot of MSPs on their website have, our team. In today's day and age, are you recommending get rid of our team? Because again, if I'm a threat actor, hey, it's Chris Lair. Like I'm going to Solace's page going, hey, it's Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I would say back in 2018, 2019, I used to kind of criticize people for having all that information on their website, not just MSPs, but companies in general, because you could tell that's where the threat actors got their information from. I still say you need to make it a really good reason to put that out there. And if you're going to do something, have somebody that's pretty obviously like obvious, like your CEO, that's going to be easily identifiable other ways. But at the same time, as there's so many sources available now for this information, I mean, that helps. But I mean, these guys, these bad guys, they use Zoom info and all sorts of other sources to get stuff. So it's a tough thing. I mean, you know, we were talking about Eric's client. I mean, he's an exec. He's going to be targeted. So, you know, and the other thing I didn't want to forget is this style of attack where they deluge you with emails to either cause a distraction or to cause stress or urgency or whatever. This is being used in this type of attack, but we're also seeing it be used. I had somebody call me up where their online banking, what they use for ACH and wires, the exact same method. The credentials were stolen, and while the bad guy was in there doing the fraud in the online banking system, they deluged the company with emails. So they were so distracted with all these emails, they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're not paying attention to what's going on in their bank account, and they lost $250,000 in one day as a result of that. So, you know, back, you know, Todd dropped, but on the security awareness training, the thing that I would emphasize is, hey, this is the stuff that you at least have to have a conversation about and say, well, man, maybe it's just some weird spam thing going on. No, that's usually an indication that somebody's trying to create a distraction or something for you. So it's less about identifying, to me and to my opinion, you know, a bad email. It's more about seeing these other things that could be used to distract you and to do things while you're distracted.
Got it. Thanks, bud.
Interesting. So if folks go to the tabletop at Right of Boom, how is it that you're going to, you know, kind of start off the Black Basta ransomware attack during the tabletop?
Yeah, so basically when we create the tabletop, I mean, we aren't giving anybody any indications of what we're doing ahead of time, right? So we're going to, now what we do is we do level set the expectations because, you know, Andrew knows we've been doing this for a long time, and you know, we get in these scenarios and there's always one guy in the room going, well, that would never happen to us because we have this in place. We have that in place. I mean, you just had this one guy in the corner. So we level set that and say, we know we're not going to account for all the different controls everybody might have in this room, but we put forth the different scenarios. And then we basically allow people to start making decisions on which way they would go or not. And then we provide feedback on that. It's incredibly interactive. There's going to be people walking around. I mean, it's going to be, you know, people will be able to, you know, take somebody like if Todd was in the room, Todd would be able to interject as well as ask questions. So that's the idea. And we usually will cover the technical side, legal side, you know, what we see people do wrong in regards to how they communicate with their staff when something like this goes on and that type of stuff. So that's how it's all going to be. And when we do those different steps in the scenario, those different chapters or whatever you want to call it, they'll kind of introduce those different elements. So it's technical is just one piece of it. We want to get emotion in there. We want to get, you know, somebody in there throwing curveballs and doing those types of things. That's what we do in our sessions.
That's awesome. So like, what do you think, you know, this is kind of off script, but when you do this kind of exercise, what are you hoping like are key takeaways for folks that attend? So like, hey, here's what you expect. You're going to go through this, but then when you walk away, you'll be able to say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, or what are they going to do when they go back?
Yeah, right. So the key takeaways is number one is to go back and educate their MSP, their organization internally first, and, you know, talk about the lessons learned and to also review things that they do, whether, you know, most MSPs today, especially the ones attending Right and Boom, are usually in good shape about documenting the things of what happens when something like this occurs, who's supposed to document what you're not supposed to document. So I think we've moved the needle there. But we do want them to go back and kind of spread the word within their organization and potentially update incident response plans, policies, that type of thing. And then the second piece is to be able to take that to their clients and, you know, to educate their clients and make sure that they're aware of the risk and that type of thing. But B, I do think having these types of conversations does lead to additional sales as well. So maybe you've been wanting this client to do something more with regards to security, take different things to another level, introduce another product, whatever the case, and it's been tough sledding. Well, now you can come back from Right and Boom, not only our session, but everything else you learned throughout the Right and Boom, and to maybe incorporate that in and potentially get your clients to add more products and services. That's
it's
just,
also,
Gary's not on, I had to say that.
but it's also a good, it's about stories, right? I mean, Chris, you know, now you have like, again, the B, right? The B word, it's about the business. And now you can say, hey, look, I want to kind of run through this scenario that we just dealt with, right? And how it impacted a business. And that's staying away from the technical conversation, the security, bits and bytes conversation that don't necessarily drive the outcomes we want.
No, it's exactly right. And to bring forth examples of different types of businesses, right? So just like last week, I got a call from a law firm who had been hit by some form. And I think the ransomware wasn't able to encrypt. Again, they did have Huntress and it did stop things. But they did have some data get out. But when that guy called me, he's like, look, he goes, I have insurance. I talked to my broker. My broker can't get any movement going on there. He goes, personally, I'm losing more money by the hour because my attorneys can't bill. And he goes, plus, because they kind of isolated everything. He goes, plus my attorney yesterday was in court and he didn't have his, he didn't have his stuff with him. And the judge showed him no empathy and just lit him up, I guess, about he didn't really care that their office had been a victim of a cyber attack. And that is, so he's like, I don't care what goes on. I'm going to hire you guys. I'll deal with insurance after the fact, but I'm losing more money. So I think that's what we have to stress with people now when they're talking with their clients about the businesses is really kind of get down to these examples and share these stories and talk about, hey, you might not think you're losing money right away, but in your case, you might. In your other case, you might be able to survive 3 days. But the other thing is just to understand the pain that you go through for weeks and even months after the fact when dealing with these situations. I mean, look at, the example Eric showed. I mean, that email compromise was months and months and months ago. And now it's just coming away. So if you don't take action, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But if you do take action, you just have to understand that it's not going to be an overnight situation. It's going to carry on for a while. So that's what we try to convey in these events and hope people take those lessons and communicate them to others.
I think that's really a great point. You bring up the example of the law firm. My good friends are lawyers, and it's against company policy right now to print anything out because there is work at home and all these things. You're not allowed to print anything out. So everything goes down and you're at court. Then what do you do? That's just another real world example of where you can look at the impact to business. What would happen to your business?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Or we've had a situation, another kind of law firm where they had some order to destroy like certain stuff they under order to destroy it. And they did, but they forgot one spot, Dropbox, and the Dropbox got compromised. So then they had to go and explain to people how that happened, why that happened. And it ended up being not as painful as they thought it would be. Mm-hmm. But those are the things you have to share with people in those lessons is it's just the smallest thing can disrupt your business and cause mistrust with your staff, mistrust with your clients. It's terrible.
Yeah. No, those are great examples. Speaking of training and understanding your company policies, we often talk about anti-phishing training, this, that, and the other, and we see phishing still being successful today. And I'm sure you'll go over that at the tabletop. Why is it that phishing still works today, even though we have beat that drum to death?
Yeah, phishing is the thing is I don't call it spray and pray, but it is. They just spray.
Right.
And when we have people that are victims of the phishing attacks, we have people that are really they feel incredibly bad because they know that they were like the one person that was advocating for phish testing and training and that type of stuff. It was just a bad day for them. They were overwhelmed or there's just a lot going on in their personal life. And then they got distracted and they fell for it. I know of an MSP that came to me, a pretty prominent MSP, and they fell for phishing. Their financial staff fell for phishing, and it was in the 6 figures as far as the loss goes. And these guys, I know these guys. They practice and preach this all the time, and it even happened to them, in their own back office. So I just see a lot of that. It's not so many where we're seeing people get phished that are just totally not trained or ignorant of what's going on out there. It's just these people that it takes one little, I guess, moment of their lives where they weren't focused on it and they get duped.
And also Chris, I think it's the change. We always talk about TTPs, right, Phyllis? It's the change in the tactics. I mean, yes, we still have people clicking on links. Yes, we still have token hard hijacking, things like that, mobile QR code. But take this scenario that we're talking about right now. This pretty clever. I mean, for your average person that isn't immersed, right? Take us all here. We live and breathe this and think about it and talk about it on a continuous basis. But your average person, that's a pretty believable clause.
Right.
You got hammered with spam. The help desk is, they even, the way Todd said, hey, you helped me out. Thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're fast.
Well, and they are fast. And I think AI helps them in the most rudimentary forms, just with the way they communicate and the language stuff. So, I mean, it just comes across so genuine and so clearly now that it is tough to distinguish. I mean, even on our side, our CEO was impersonated video wise, and it was really, really good. I mean, it fooled a lot of people. It didn't, there was no adverse outcome as a result of it. But I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, these guys are creative. They're taking advantage of a very common tool set that's out there. I saw a statistic. I think this is like 83% of the organizations in the U.S. use some form of Office 365.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean.
So I think, right here, we're making the case for, hey, anyone can have a bad day, the well-trained person, the really savvy security person. So that phishing email is probably going to work. Ransomware is going to hit. So what happens next, Chris? And how is it that MSPs should prepare for that?
Yeah. So one thing in just viewing the chat, I mean, some people, I mean, I think let's just take Todd's example where he says his client they do a lot of meetings and they do a lot of communicating with external parties. So it wasn't uncommon for somebody to reach out. Okay, well there are risks there that they accepted. So, without speaking for Todd but whatever, but when you make a decision to have those external parties involved, do you completely understand the risk associated with doing so, right? And are there additional things that you should do as an organization when an external person comes in to kind of verify or validate them, right? So those are some questions we need to ask. The other side of things is, and we've seen this even with business email compromises, where they're moving laterally into other parts of 365 like SharePoint is I think people were pretty lax because we're so tuned to on-premises stuff, and that we need file folders and all that kind of stuff secure. SharePoint, we're not concerned with. It's in 365. It's behind MFA, but we just weren't really thinking and articulating, again, the risk to our clients to say, hey, look, all that stuff you got dumped out there in SharePoint, it's really easy to dump it out there. People are saving videos, phone conversations, documents, contracts, you name it. It's all out there. Those guys move laterally. It's all theirs to access and to take. And so I think as providers, we need to get in front of I say get in front of this, but get in front of this as quickly as possible to, just better articulate what the risk is. And so when people are doing this, they understand, hey, you're accepting the risk by doing nothing further, or these are the additional things you need to do to better protect your data and to protect your people. But it's a tough one. I just know, like with Teams on your phone, as an example, there's a lot of stuff that you can do on your iPhone between apps and Teams that you can't do on your Windows device. And there are ways to lock that down, but it's painful. But if you're used to doing that on your device, and when those features are taken away, it can upset workflow and kind of do things. So there's a lot of work and effort involved to understand these things and to make sure that things are locked down enough to where it doesn't impede the business. And if it does impede the business, the client understands that that's the best direction to go.
That's also just interesting with BYOD. A lot of people just use their personal phone as an option for work. And so then, what are the rules around, well, you're going to lock down my personal phone? It's very interesting to think
You're going to increase my device. What visibility do you have? I mean, the mobile devices are the toughest one, especially now because, on your mobile carriers, we see that for some reason, the IP address they give you is associated with some other geography in the country. And so it'll trip an alert, says, hey, we see your device coming from St. Louis and you're in San Antonio. It doesn't make any sense. But for some reason, that IP address given out by the provider does that. So there's just a lot of stuff weird going on with that. Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to make sure Eric and
Yeah, it's Eric's turn. Sorry.
Bob gets in some time here, but this is where I'll just give a plug as always for Eric Woodard and the CIS controls. Is that this is where you got to have a shared responsibility model when it comes to your inventory, which he does really well when it comes to mobile. If they're using mobile and they're not letting you protect it and ring fence it and do the things you need to do, Chris, on a security control basis, then hey, that's your responsibility. So with that, Eric, over to you.
Thank you, and I'll be quick. So Chris, Andrew mentioned briefly at the onset the MGM attack, right? And of a year plus ago, and that was a situation with impersonation, right? Somebody impersonated someone, called into the help desk, one thing led to another. So one of the things that you're going to be simulating is impersonation. So how do attackers use this to make things worse during a ransomware or similar attack?
So, I mean, the impersonation stuff usually happens, at the beginning. And a lot of times with the ransomware attack, we don't see the impersonation. It happens sometime and before that, to where that person was tricked into providing credentials or whatever the case, or either some type of information, tribal knowledge or whatever you want to do that allowed the threat actor in. So we haven't seen, once the attack happens, we're dealing directly with the threat actor and dealing with them on that side. But, not to say that, not trying to give anybody ideas here, so I want to be careful here, but that we've seen cases where the threat actor, you don't pay them or you stall or whatever, they threaten to go to a regulator or whatever. So, you could see at some point where a threat actor tries to imitate somebody to a regulator to even make your life more miserable. And if that happens in the near future, I'm going to be mad that somebody took my idea and ran with it. But yeah, I can definitely see that happen.
So I've sat through a bunch of your tabletops before, and one of the things that you often do a really good job at is simulating the behavior of leaders in organizations. And I guess this is a rhetorical question, but do leaders tend to be calm, cool, and collected, or does it tend to turn into an all-out panic?
No, I would say overall they do, but there's always that 1 out of 100 that goes sideways, and it's just weird how it works. I mean, we've had situations where, we have people that necessarily aren't in it directly, but they're maybe in a financial position in the company, and they just start stirring things up from the side. Where what's interesting is, and with nonprofits, it seems more prevalent than anywhere. Everything seems to be going smoothly, but then they have to bring up somebody from their board in, and the director is who just stirs things up, or he wants to bring in their own people or whatever the case may be. And that gets really, really ugly. And then I have seen where even more so now, and I don't know if that's just because the fear factor involved, but where we've seen, the MSPs start to get very uncooperative about doing the things that we need to do for investigative purposes or whatever the case may be. And that's not a good look either. But yeah, so we're going to incorporate some of that stuff. So I haven't seen too many where, the CEO is just all irate and demanding stuff. I mean, we've had one case in particular happen that I might incorporate some of that stuff into. But yeah, it still happens.
Okay. So when the breach happens, the fallout isn't all just, operational bits and bytes. There's a lot more to it than that. So how does something like a security incident impact a company's reputation, its reputation with its customers, reputation with its partners and others?
Yeah, I think the first really thing it does is it seems to impact the employees the most, right? The employees seem to lose the trust immediately, and they start to worry more about what's going to happen with their data and that type of stuff more so than anyone else. And then the next one would be more like partners and stuff. So especially in healthcare, where we see their vendors won't support them until there's some type of evidence that says, hey, the bad guys are out and they're now more secure. So that's where we see a lot of those relationships deter. And then I would say last would be with the clients. And I would say it just kind of depends, right? I mean, it's interesting. We've had the number of small companies, you're talking less than 20 people, but their clients are massive. And they might have 4 or 5 just massive clients. And that gets pretty tricky and dodgy. Or they have their clients are the government. So there might not be a DOD agency, but another federal government agency that you have to deal with. Then that gets dicey. And then I would say the worst cases when you have to deal with, we see a lot of people that don't realize they have regulators that they report to that they didn't realize they report to. And I know it sounds weird, but take the New York Department of Financial Services as an example. A lot of people don't realize because they're in another state that all they have to do is a very minimum requirement for them to fall under that regulatory body. And when they find out about that, it's when they've had one of these attacks and it's a rude awakening. So that's just kind of where we see a lot of these conflicts arise when we work in these cases.
So you've mentioned the MSP's role in all of this. Can you talk to us about why the MSP's sales conversations with their customers should start with a business impact analysis?
Yeah, I mean, the business impact analysis, if performed correctly, if the client understands its purpose and has significant input into it, then they'll have the buy off on it. And that's really what kind of it should open a business leader's eyes to why you're asking them to do the things they need to do. So, and to understand all the facets of their business, all the pieces, I always come back to that Keystone pipeline example. The pipeline itself, it was running fine. It was all the back office stuff that was impacted. So since the back office stuff was impacted, the pipeline had to stop. So, so you can have the greatest security on that pipeline, which you should have. But on the back office stuff, if you're not doing the same stuff there, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And so doing a BIA, if done right, will show your clients from, hey, here are the dependencies in my business. Here are the critical points. Hey, maybe at this time of the month, it's more important than this other time of the month or this time of the year and so on and so forth. So understanding all those things. I mean, like take a ski resort business. There are times you definitely don't want to be hacked in the ski resort business, and sometimes where you don't want to be hacked, but it's a little bit easier to deal with. So another good example.
Appreciate it. Bob, to you.
All right. So, I mean, Chris, the one thing that everybody kind of wants to know, at least in as an MSP, what do you feel like are where do most companies fall short in being able to deal with a group like this, like the Black Basta folks?
Yeah, so a lot of people, number one, falls short is they might have an incident response plan, but it just isn't something that they can do. Like they took a template, just kind of filled it out as if it was a form and didn't really relate it back to their business and who are the applicable parties in their business that can actually do the things in the incident response plan that it says that need to be done. So that's number one. Number two is we do see a lot of people have no idea what to do from an insurance perspective. They don't know who to call. They don't know their policy. They don't even know how the policy works, that type of thing. So that's, or they don't have, that's not even counting the ones that don't have insurance. But when you have insurance, understanding what those things need to be done. And I think in the fall short things, it's just people just don't have an understanding of these things aren't very difficult, right? So I always tell people this isn't like James Bond type stuff where, I mean, it's configurations. It's, it's that decision to, use that firewall for another year or for another 2 years and just eke it out. So you don't have to spend another $1,000 on another one or whatever the case may be. Or, it's on the hardening and the configuration side of things. It's, hey, need to migrate. They want to go to 365. Well, that's fantastic. But there needs to be a project and we need to talk about security and hardening and those types of things. Also training people, I think, especially in small business side, they don't appreciate how much you should really train people on, hey, look, you're still using Outlook. It's a little different world now. So that, when you're using on-premises Exchange, maybe this is the stuff you had to deal with. When you move over to 365, some of those things still apply, but there's some new things now that you need to be concerned about. So I just think that you're not trying to burden these small companies down with a bunch of extra steps that are meaningless, but they are things that enterprises do as a normal part of their practice, and those things need to be kind of sized down and done correctly in the small business as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to have an IR plan. It's a whole nother thing to actually go and practice it and get used to deploying it, right? I mean, being able to actually execute on it. And I think that's, for me, that's the thing I see missing is they, like you said, they'll check a box. They've got something written down, but it never, if they've never actually sat in an exercise to try and, even if it's not their IR plan, just being in an exercise in general, it helps them get smarter about how to really work those problems, right? And so
Yeah,
to me,
I always tell people, I came from the banking world, right? And still to this day, you have to do IR tabletop testing. You got to do disaster recovery tabletop testing. You got to do pandemic tabletop testing. And the one things the banks learned through the pandemic tabletop testing is all that pandemic stuff they did ahead of time didn't prepare them for COVID.
right.
Now, I'm not blaming them because I think if anybody was prepared for COVID, then you got to get some conspiracy theories going. But at the same time, it taught them a lesson that says, hey, look, you can't shortchange this. You can't cut the corner on this stuff. It does need to be, it needs to relate to something that's going to really potentially impact you. And that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah. So how close is your tabletop going to kind of get to, because you and I both sat in, I mean, you sit in on a million of these. I've been in on a bunch of these myself, right? And actually actual incidents, right? And there
Yeah.
is a world of pressure, especially from the MSP side, because we dealt with the SolarWinds deal, right? So that was something that we were fielding ourselves since we were a client of SolarWinds. So how close does your tabletop get to the level of chaos that goes on in something like this from a ransomware standpoint? Because there's a lot
Yeah.
of pressure in these things, right?
There is a lot of pressure, but I know that there are other tabletop exercises that others do that are more like introducing super chaotic stuff, and that's not the idea of this one. I mean, I think those super chaotic ones, those guys do a great job of that, and I've been involved in those, participate in them, and they're great. And I think those are really good from a technical perspective. We try to slow that down a little bit. I mean, we only have 2 hours, and that's usually supposed to represent 2 weeks typically, just say on average. But what we're trying to do is just try to incorporate those things and bring, so I will incorporate real life stuff. We'll just anonymize it, blend it with things and that type of stuff to introduce it. But I don't want people to go run down to the local CBD store and have to pop a bunch of gummies after I'm done. I want them to learn stuff, not be too stressed out.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you feel like the top 2 or 3 things are that an MSP can learn and, to kind of be prepared for ransomware event or attack of this type?
Yeah, I think one thing is, I mean, it depends on your customer base, but you can't treat them all the same in your customers. I mean, you can't take a, cookie cutter thing and apply it to all your companies, all your clients, especially if they're in different industries, different things. I mean, we see companies that operate in different time zones that can impact things. I mean, we've had a number of cases where they have operations, they're based here, a bulk of their operations is here, but they have something in Asia. They have something somewhere else too. And those are impacted as well. They might not have been infected, but because you're down, they're down. And that kind of complicates things a lot. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that I think MSPs need to take the next step in understanding truly what an impact can have, an incident like this can have, even if it's as simple, just you lost some money or there was just a data breach or, it's a full operational impact. I mean, I still say that the data breach side of things is the most punitive because you have to deal, because, I mean, we've had attorneys on here. I mean, they'll tell you that the number of records that are impacted used to be a higher threshold for class action attorneys to want to be involved, but the numbers keeps getting lower and lower. So there's a lot of ambulance chasing class action attorneys out there looking for the latest breach to go class action on somebody.
Yeah. So, I mean, since we're talking about, I mean, I think it's a good place to wind up because it all comes back down to this, in my opinion. But let's just talk about cyber insurance. How does the presence or absence of it really kind of affect the aftermath of a situation like this?
Yeah, so we can start with the absence. So the problem is when it's the absence of cyber, or we do have people that have cyber insurance that have really high deductibles, and that makes them just unfortunately count pennies. And it's very difficult to work very quickly and to get people back up and running and throw resources at it and do that type of thing. I mean, you can have a situation where there's a live threat actor involved, and that could, take 6 or 7 of my people getting in there to get that threat actor out, right? And to understand what the situation was, how long the threat actor been in, all that kind of stuff. Well, you're talking about them working, 8 to 10 hours a day. Let's just say it's, you can do 80 hours. So when you have insurance, that eases your pain of having to worry about that financially. So when you don't have insurance, the number one issue is you're counting pennies. We also see people that are apprehensive to bringing legal in for the same exact reason. And so, I tell people it's equally important. It's very rare that we have a case where you don't need some type of legal representation and advice in there from a breach attorney. And the breach attorneys we work with them, all of them, try to provide reasonable rates and do that type of thing, and try to minimize things and not have 100 calls a day to drive up rates. But when you don't have insurance, it just comes down to a dollar issue right there. When you do have insurance, it helps, but it also helps to understand what insurance is going to do, the questions they're going to ask, that type of thing. I mean, you got to make sure that what you put on your application policy is accurate and reflects right, that you're not wrong. If you said you got MFA on everything, you better have MFA on it. If you said you have 100,000 records that you store that have PII, you better have 100,000 or less. I mean, those types of things is what bites people. So you don't want to go in a situation where coverage is questionable, because that just makes things ugly as well.
Yeah, there's so many facets to this, right? Because most people don't know, if you have cyber insurance, you actually can get kind of a free consultation with your incident coach that's associated with that policy in advance. It's free. They'll talk to you, tell you what to expect, how that's all going to go, right? And Eric will tell you sometimes it makes sense for you to get a different incident coach than the one the insurance provider may have as your primary, right? Because one's working on your behalf, one's working on the insurance behalf, even though they're NDA. There's so much we could talk about just that little bit there, but that's but I'm with you. The big deal is just, if you have it, make sure it's enough, make sure you understand how to use it, make sure you know how to, in your incident response plan, how to really start all those conversations correctly. So
make sure it's updated, right? You acquire somebody or that type of thing, you need to make sure you go back and figure that out, because we've been in those situations too, where there's just a policy, but it only covers an entity, not the entire organization itself, and that causes issues too.
Yeah, and don't leave your damn policy on your network. Take that thing off your network and store it somewhere else, for goodness sake.
Exactly right. I mean, in a very recent case, the forensics, we looked at the very first search term when the threat actor was in there was INSUR. That was the very first search term they looked for. So they're looking for that policy. So you need to have access to it, and B, you don't want them to have access to it. So that's the two sides of that.
Yeah. Most of your providers will keep a copy for you online so you can get to it out of band. So another little thing that you learn.
Yeah, TFC, we have an app. You get to it through your app. So
Yep. All right, Andrew, back over to you.
Yeah, no, it's such a great point about the policy, because we know that they're looking for. It's almost like the same thing with the bank statements, Chris. It's like, hey, we want 300 grand. We don't have 300 grand. I got your statement. I know you have 300 grand, right? It's those things that are on the network or the policy that they're going to go right for, right, Chris?
Yeah, that, or we've had victims where they have their Instagram accounts. They say we don't have any money, but on their Instagram accounts, it shows them driving in their new Lambo, or taking their wife on vacation over in France, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, it could be your financials or whatever you've decided to put out on social media. Yeah, it's going to be tough to argue that you don't have any money when you have all that stuff posted out there.
That's right. So in closing, with 1 minute, Ann says, hey, what about the good news? I think the good news is, one, Chris, your session was like literally sold out. Not that it was for sale, it was sold out in the sense of there's no room, right? Very
fully subscribed.
Thank you.
Don't beg me to come in. There's no way to get you in.
Yeah, and so that was and the fact that a few years ago MSPs weren't monetizing incident readiness, tabletops, and this falls into the VCISO category. We're seeing so I'd say, and like you said, the opportunity to educate. This is a whole nother area that is really important for MSPs, and so that's what I would say the good news is. And the fact that you all are here with us. So with that, Chris, thanks a million for coming on and talking about this. Bob, as always, thanks for coming on and filling in. Eric as well. Phyllis, great to see you back. And in all that, wishing everybody a fantastic week ahead. We'll look forward to seeing you next Monday. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.